You have to admire the attention to detail that Brian Bassett gives his comic strip, Red and Rover. Notice here that Red is wearing a lovely Gene Kranz-like vest and excellent ear protection for the launch for Rover. Before the Apollo 13 information was presented, I forgot to have you make a note of the space agency that had their first launch of a rocket in February of 1970. And that is what we now call JAXA, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency. And I said what we now call JAXA because in 2003, matter of fact, 1st of October 2003, so 1st of October when NASA was formed in 1958, in 2003, 3 former organizations that had vested interest in pursuit of astronautical science and exploration merged to form JAXA. Here's the headquarters for JAXA. I believe it's called, or pronounced Chofu, not entirely sure, but the west of Japan here. We have a first, the first lunar rover. You may think for US, perhaps the name of Lunokhod leads you to realize that this is another first for the Soviet Union. And the Lunar Prospector mission was able to spot the first lunar rover and zoom in even further, 25-meter away range, and identify that that was indeed the Lunokhod 1. So that is a check mark for the Soviet Union. This is Luna 17. This is the vehicle from which the Lunokhod was rolled out of. This is a look at Surveyor 1 that we sent from the U.S. in 1966, and give you a sense that we were exploring the moon, both the U.S. and USSR, not only to better understand it, but also to see, is it going to be possible to land a spacecraft on this surface? So the yellow triangles are the U.S. efforts at landing objects to take data. The red triangles are the Soviet lunar exploration efforts, and the green ones are the Apollo manned missions to walk on the surface of the moon. Speaking of lunar exploration, 38 of your notebook to the moon and back has this infographic from historicspacecraft.com, and you can see all these wonderful missions. The one I keep referring to and showing you at the end of each Apollo mission is the Lunar Prospector, the one providing all the great imagery of the astronaut footpaths and such. We have our first soft landing on another planet, so rather than crashing into the planet, we have a dedicated landing onto the planet to preserve the vehicle and gather as much data as can be gathered. This is the Venera 7, so it was certainly on the planet Venus, and you probably have spotted the CCCP, so that is going to be another check mark for the Soviet Union. Continue our look at the Apollo program. Apollo 14, the one to follow Apollo 13. Now, obviously, this was not the main objective of Apollo 14, a U.S. hero on the moon. Here is Alan Shepard, the first U.S. astronaut to travel to space in the Mercury program back in May of 1961. So a decade later, he's returning to space. The names you want to jot down are the crew of Rusa, Shepard, and Mitchell. And it just so happens that Commander Shepard here, you can tell by the red stripe, Commander Shepard here is the oldest human to walk on the surface of another world. And he was 47. Their patch featured the astronaut logo blasting from Earth with the target goal of the moon in mind. And we know that there's oftentimes joke patches that the backup crew like to have, and this is in honor of the Roadrunner and Coyote It's always trying to chase the Roadrunner, who goes around beep beep. And so they were, Cernan, Evans, and Engel, trying to do what they could to become the prime crew. You know, I have to say, I think in all my years of describing the backup patch, that is my best beep beep impersonation of the Roadrunner. I'll splice that beep beep and play it back for you and see what you think. Beep beep. Even if I do say so myself, I'm going to call that quality. So Cernan, Evans, and Engel, the backup crew pictured here. Alan Shepard, he was originally scheduled to be the Apollo commander along with his crew of the Apollo 13 mission. But Shepard went to Deke Slayton and suggested that maybe he have more time training in the Apollo program, as he had previously not been flight status ready due to an ear disorder. But he was obviously cleared, and even though you've been getting these presentations one right after the other, you might chronologically think that the Apollo missions happened 1 week, next week, 1 day, next day. These missions are assigned well in advance, a couple years in advance, and you spend months and months and months and months training with your team. So it was a wise decision for the Shepard Apollo 13 team to move to the Apollo 14 and the Apollo 14 team then to switch places. And here's a look at Shepard and his family ready for his return to space 10 years later. So he's got the kiddos and a couple of dogs here. And notice, when you're an Apollo astronaut, you have dogs. But when you have kitties, you're a Mercury astronaut. And it's kind of funny here that the caption itself said, "The cats have given way to dogs." The launch of Apollo 14. And this is about a quarter of an hour after the successful launch. Mission Control, looking at the big screen monitor rather than their individual monitors at the moment. The Kitty Hawk was the name of the command service module, and what you're looking here is at the Antares lunar module, and there were many repeated attempts to try and get the Kitty Hawk command service module to dock with the Antares that you see here. It wasn't anything to do with pilot error. There was some sort of locking mechanism that wasn't quite releasing as it should, and so it took well over an hour, just under 2 hours actually, to successfully retrieve the Lem Antares from this Saturn stage. We'll show you a very short look at some news coverage from that era.
This, of course, is a situation that hasn't occurred before. Now, it's not certain on our part how long a delay can be tolerated in this operation. Eventually, they will have to make a choice of either going around the moon without the lunar module.
Roger.
But we also have the other problem, is if they do not connect with the lunar module, of course, the kicking off of the service module, or a correction on that, the third stage, will be delayed. For example, if it takes them another hour to finally make the docking complete, and then they disconnect from the third stage, what maneuvers must they do now to kick off that third stage so that it will impact on the moon? They had it programmed for a certain point in time, 7:33, which is fast approaching this evening. How long they can delay that evasive maneuver and sending the third stage to the moon, if indeed they do finally make a connection with the lunar module, we don't know.
And it's my opinion that the sad commentary on humanity is that many people were tuning in to the Apollo 14 live coverage because of the events of Apollo 13, where quite possibly the 3 men may have perished in space. And so people are tuning in, is this going to be another situation where people might die? And so more people were tuning in, and so the broadcasts were being transmitted and shown on television of the difficulties that we're having in docking with the Antares lunar module. When they did get that released, then they found that there was a signal in the computer LEM that began giving an abort signal. Then there was lots of discussions about what should be done about that, and then when they were landing on the surface, there were some difficulties in an altitude reading as well. And not for you to think that the Apollo 14 mission had one problem after the other. Every single Apollo mission has all kinds of computer glitches, wires that get caught up in some circuitry. There's always glitches go on, but this was the longest time that it took to try and dock with the LEM. And it goes to show you the importance of the Gemini program and how difficult it really is to rendezvous with the vehicle in space. But after all that, we do have Alan Shepard, the first astronaut for the U.S., walking on the surface of the moon. And his words were, as he was walking around, and it's been a long way, but we're here. And putting down some of the tools and equipment that they were using. This one is a seismic experiment, so being able to register tremors and moonquakes on the moon. They had a lot of collecting tools to get the rock and dust samples, to be able to pick up things. If you look at the end of this particular moon tool, looks a little bit like, looks like a golf club there. Let's see what that's about.
Another grueling business trip. First came the usual flight delay, the cramped seats in coach, those cold meals eaten on the fly, a rock-hard bed, back-to-back conferences and field demos, and those boys from headquarters jerking you around. Can't blame a guy for trying to sneak in a little golf, but even then, you can't catch a break. The local course is in rotten shape. It looks like the darn moon. This is the story of Al Shepard's Cosmic 6-iron and how it delivered the shot heard round the universe. It was the first moon mission after a near catastrophe. An explosion aboard Apollo 13 caused a power failure and a white-knuckle re-entry. Apollo 14's mission was to put the moon program back on track and cap the career of America's first man in space. But astronaut Alan Shepard, who first shot into space in 1961, had one more thing in mind. On January 31st, 1971, a smiling Shepard ascended the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. He had more than his historic mission to grin about. Inside his moon suit was this sweat sock, and inside the sock, some unauthorized gear. So why did Smilin' Al feel he had to smuggle a 6-iron aboard?
I have a feeling that if he had gone to NASA in the first place and told them his idea, they would have said no. So his reaction, I suppose, was to smuggle the club head and the 2 balls in a sock and place them in his spacesuit.
Only a few people at NASA were in on the stunt, including a couple of technicians who fitted the club head onto this collapsible shaft, which was also used for collecting lunar samples. Then the club had to be further modified. Shepard found he couldn't swing with both hands in his bulky spacesuit. The technicians attached a length of nylon rope and an extra handle to the shaft so that he could swing the club with his hands apart. Finally, the 6-iron and Apollo 14 were ready for a moonshot. Commander Shepard did have some business to take care of before he could think about golf. There was the matter of a 250,000-mile flight to the moon. Then he had to solve an equipment problem that nearly aborted the landing. Once on the moon, there were samples to collect and equipment to test, including this odd vehicle nicknamed the Lunar Rickshaw. NASA had its priorities, but then so did Shepard.
I can only think that he had golf on his mind the whole time.
4!
And this was going to be his time away from work a little bit if he could swing it, so to speak.
Finally, just before climbing into the lunar module for the trip back to Earth, it was tea time.
You might recognize what I have in my hand. It still happens to have a genuine 6-iron on the bottom of it. In my left hand, I have a little white pellet that's familiar to millions of Americans.
Shepard dropped the ball, and with his left hand on the floating handle and his right on the shaft, he took the first ever swing on the moon. It was also the moon's first bad shank. The ball tumbled only a few yards.
On his own words, he chili dipped the first shot, then decided with the last shot he would take it one-handed. He announced as it left the club face, "There it goes. Miles and miles and miles," which was a bit of an overstatement, but good for the promotion of the game, nonetheless.
The actual distance was about 250 yards. Not bad for a one-handed 6-iron shot out of a sand trap, even with an assist from the one. As Shepard packed up his 6-iron for the return trip, NASA braced itself. Memories were fresh of Apollo 13's re-entry horrors. But the commander engineered a perfect splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. As for the now famous 6-iron, like all objects from space, it was scrubbed down in the standard 14-day quarantine, then shipped off for further study. Not by scientists, but by people more like Shepard himself. Golf nuts.
He knew of us, and we certainly knew of him, but this donation was not something that we expected. So it was very surprising, and it's been cherished ever since.
Alan Shepard's 6-iron is on permanent display at the United States Golf Association Museum and Library in Far Hills, New Jersey. You'll find his 2 golf balls on the moon.
And it's always awesome to be able to have the oral history of the person who lived through the event and was the event. And so we have a short clip here of Alan Shepard describing the scenario that you just saw. So in his own words, as they say.
There's no atmosphere there, so you can put a spin on it, and it won't hook or slice.
And I have to say I could not follow the trajectory.
And I went into the suit room at night with a suit technician, pressurized the suit, and practiced swinging.
They had completed everything they had on their timeline. No, there was no problem, at least in my mind, and I don't think anybody in Mission Control's mind.
Then I went in to see the boss. He said, "No way. Absolutely not. It's far too frivolous." He said, "You've been giving me problems for many years, Shepard. The answer is absolutely no."
Al had to get approval to do this, and it worked its way through the system.
Okay, let's go to work. Roger.
Finally, he said, "Okay, Shepard, you win."
Yeah, it's a beautiful day here at Small Morrow Bay.
I volunteered to be a capsule communicator, a Capcom, for that mission.
He was the one that was doing the actual communication between Mission Control and between us and the surface. He had no idea what was happening. What I had planned to do was to get in front of the television camera, which beamed the images back to Earth so they could see what I was doing.
Al went and pulled out what you could see fairly clearly on the TV looked like a golf club.
We had an extendable collapsible handle that we normally use with a scoop on the end. So I had the local pro take the head of a 6-iron, put a little fitting on it so it snapped on the end of this handle.
Houston, while you're looking that up, you might recognize what I have in my hand as the handle for the contingency sample return. It just so happens to have a genuine 6-iron on the bottom of it. In my left hand, I have a little white pellet that's familiar to millions of Americans. Drop it down. Unfortunately, the suit is so stiff I can't do this with 2 hands, but I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here.
Even though I tried to keep my head down on the first swing, I really didn't. And I hit a shank. It was just sort of a one-hand chili dip kind of thing.
Before I dirt the ball, here we go again.
Yeah, I'm not sure how his lie was. Either the moon is kind of like one big sand trap.
Here we go.
I admit that once I tossed the ball down, I kind of teed it up a little bit, got a little bit of a better lie, because I figured nobody was going to quote the rules of golf to me from 250,000 miles away. Anyway.
Miles and miles and miles.
The whole room was pretty excited about it.
Very good, Al.
Everybody in the golfing world thought it was fantastic. You'd tell a guy, he said, how far do you hit your drive? He said, well, I could drive 250 yards. I said, do you realize on the moon you could hit that driver 1,500 yards? Then the guy's eyes get big and he said, now wait a minute, I got to tell you, the golf course is now 42,000 yards long.
Perhaps this is what astronaut Shepard had in mind as he was envisioning his golf swing on the moon. Now, immediately after his golf shot, that was the shot heard around the universe, like the beep heard around the world, the astronaut that was with him on the moonwalking adventure was astronaut Mitchell, and astronaut Mitchell has a lesser-known sport highlight on the moon that is of equal fun, and here's astronaut Mitchell years later recounting the event, and you'll see the footage as well.
Many people remember, of course, Alan Shepard hitting the golf balls into space. But you had some fun, too.
This is the greatest javelin throw of the century. See if it is. Oh, Lefty himself. Outstanding.
He hit his golf ball, and after 3 whacks at it, and using makeshift equipment. And I threw a javelin using the staff from a solar wind experiment, and that was the first Lunar Olympics.
Right in the middle of the crater, stabilized. But there's all beautiful.
Shepard gets credit for a pretty far drive out there in space, but your javelin toss actually went further?
By about 4 inches, yes, and we have the picture to prove where it went, and we have a picture of the javelin and the golf ball right behind it. And that was our fun and games here for the last few minutes before we got into the spacecraft.
I wonder when the next lunar adventure will be of the Moon Olympics. Here we have the successful splashdown of Apollo 14. And the lunar prospector showing you the landing site for Apollo 14. And you can see the footpaths of Mitchell and Shepard. And the rickshaw and the scientific experiments that were mentioned earlier, and the commemorative patch that was made upon their return has the quote that astronaut Shepard uttered when he was walking on the moon. It's been a long way, but we're here. Got the astronaut logo. You'll see this is Shepard. Got the golf club swinging the golf ball here in a faint Mercury 7 logo. And the trees over here on the patch are significant as the Apollo 14 mission carried seeds of various types of trees that were planted on Earth, and they're dubbed the moon trees, with one of these moon trees shown here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. If you were to put into an internet search moon trees, there is a page dedicated to showing where these various plants or these trees are planted across the nation. 19th of April 1971, we have the first space station. The name of this first space station is Salyut, which is Russian for salute. And so you'll see the Soviet Union was very much concentrated on the original progression that NASA had set up, that, we'll put a thing in space, a object, creature, human, do some laps around the planet, do extended stays in orbit for the long-term goal of going to the moon. But before going to the moon, let's establish what it's like on the human body to stay in space for extended periods of time. So the Soviet Union, while the U.S. was progressing to land on the moon, kept the focus on establishing themselves in the fields of space stations development. So that will be a check for the Soviet Union. And I've just taken the last section of that first page here for ourselves. So the Soviets. And give you a size comparison of the current space station on orbit, the ISS. Here's Salyut. And we will spend some time exploring the various space stations that have come and gone and stayed. With there being just Apollo 15, 16, 17 remaining, we'll look at those 3 remaining Apollo missions, and then we'll resume looking at the world of space stations.